For us in Oxfam, national climate funds are one central element of the global climate finance architecture as we see it evolving. This is because for us it is very important that as much as possible decisions on the use of financial support for mitigating emissions or adapting to climate change should be devolved to the national level so that we can develop true ownership in the country on the use of the funds. And national climate funds can be part of that, but of course this should not be prescriptive. We want this to be done in a way that's best for every single context and every single country. So some countries might choose to continue working with multilateral implementing entities such as UNDP or UNEP, for instance. Others might develop their own national implementing entities, or a range of them even, which could include government departments, could include NGOs or other actors. But some other countries would say, we have high capability, we want to be in control of the use of the funds as much as possible on our own, so we want to develop national climate funds, or trust funds as they are sometimes called. So finance would go from the Green Climate Fund to the national level, and then there would be a process which should be transparent and participatory, involving all stakeholders, obviously, on the use of the funds. To make that work, it's extremely important that these funds are set up in a system of accountability and transparency and participation of civil society and also the affected citizens, which is crucially important to make sure we truly develop this ownership on the country level we have. One problem, of course, is here, do we really engage civil society to the degree that we can say this is participatory, is the process transparent? And then, of course, the accountability question is important, because we want to ensure that the use of the funds is fully accountable to the citizens of the country. And for us, this means accountable to the citizens rather than accountable to the donors, who are the providers of the finance, but who should not be involved overly on the question of where and how the funds are being used, because that, of course, is for the countries to decide.
I would say four broad lines. And again, I think it's both for global funds, but particularly then when you're looking at national fund levels, that you want to ensure that those broader principles are operationalized. One is the entire question of transparency and information disclosure, and I can go a little bit into detail in that. The other one is accountability, and I would say accountability cuts both ways. One is obviously looking at what kind of accountability requirements there might be to the larger contributing community on the international level, but even more importantly, from my point of view, would be the accountability towards your own citizenry, how you do ensure that. Third one, and I think that's part of the accountability, but I think it definitely warrants like its own look, is how you structure and guarantee stakeholder input and participation, and to do that in a way that is meaningful and comprehensive and not little spot on, and obviously also includes some of the groups that are most vulnerable and might be politically disenfranchised or marginalized, and I'm thinking particularly of indigenous groups and women, but also local communities that might not necessarily have a say. And the fourth big element is basically the question of audits. Who does kind of an independent review? Is there some possibility for a redress for citizenry if they feel that they are harmed? And kind of what other oversight structures are there? And particularly, I think, if you think of the role for national governments, for them to have some sort of an oversight capacity would be very helpful. And as I said, those are the four broader lines. Maybe to go really briefly in the transparency and the disclosure, I think it's crucially important that there is public information available, or the information is made public about what kind of decisions are made, funding decisions, and what specifically is funded. So that includes obviously information about funding disbursement. It's a matter, for example, how the national funding body makes its decisions. Is it going to be in a meeting that is open to observers? Do people have the possibility to hear in? Is the telecast? Is the information archived? Is it possible, for example, to get some transcript of the meetings, reports, and so on and so forth? I think those are all very crucial points from a transparency disclosure point of view. Accountability, again, as I mentioned, is a two-way street, particularly if you're looking at accountability basically domestically towards its own citizenry. And again, the role that parliaments might have in giving some input and having some input and having some oversight is crucial. But I think it's a way in terms of the accountability to figure out how national priorities for the spending of such a fund are defined, or how you come to those. And so you need to ensure that obviously whatever you fund not just benefits a select few, but actually has the largest possible benefit for the largest number of citizens, again, including groups that are usually probably not so well connected that they can go to somebody in a ministry and say, hey, I really think you should deal with that project. And again, I'm thinking of local communities, I'm thinking of some of the vulnerable groups, I'm thinking of women that might not have the capacity to actually feed in through some of the municipalities or other more top-down government structures. And so I think it's really important to put that in. And again, I think that is the question then of stakeholder input. How do you involve those stakeholders, communities, various population groups that might otherwise not have a possibility to have a say? How do you involve them throughout a project cycle? And so I think obviously the decision making is very important, but even more important in terms of effectiveness, efficiency, and equity of what you're trying to fund is making sure that you involve them in an ongoing monitoring. So the community-based monitoring, give them a role. Also, that you have the possibility, if something goes wrong through implementation, to know about it and maybe have corrective actions as measures get implemented. And again, the independent audit, I think it's crucially important that there are some evaluations done from outside of the structure, not beholden to the governing body of a national fund, that you have regular outside evaluations, not just once every blue moon, but make that a regular feature, that there is mandatory follow-up on those evaluations. So it's not just a report that stays on a shelf, but is actually picked up, that you have redress for citizens, whether you do it through a redress or a complaint mechanism, that there is a possibility for people that might be actually hurt by some climate projects implemented through a national fund, that they have a contact person, some sort of adjudication process where they can go and say, this is not going right, what are you going to do about it? How are we going to be compensated? How is further harm to be prevented? And again, I think the role of parliaments is very important there. If things are going wrong, it might be needed to have some sort of a parliamentary inquiry, or that parliamentary requests to the government for information relief or for corrective action.
The first is defining your objectives. The second is identifying capitalization. The third is instilling effective governance. The fourth is instilling fiduciary managements. The fifth is implementation arrangements. And the sixth is monitoring, reporting, and verification. Now, while all six of these are very, very important, certainly governance and transparency lie at the heart of any effort to establish a national climate fund. This is very important. And I want to emphasize really three aspects of this. The first thing that I would like to emphasize is having very clear objectives, very clear standards, and very clear metrics for a national climate fund. Knowing what the NCF is meant to achieve and knowing where the NCF is going is very important to ensure that everyone is on the same page and that everyone understands what the NCF is meant to do. Confusion on this can sometimes lead to disagreements about how the fund is managed. And so ensuring that everyone is on the same page is very important. The second part that I want to emphasize are the roles of different organizations and people at the table. I've seen many national climate funds be successful because they have had interministerial dialogues where you have different ministries at the table. Also, the role of civil society is critically important. Having voices that are not necessarily representing the government is very important to ensuring that a diverse array of interests are met through the National Climate Fund. It also ensures buy-in from all of the different stakeholders so that the National Climate Fund can achieve what it is meant to achieve using all of the resources of these various stakeholders. It's very important. And the third thing that I would like to emphasize is the idea of tracking. Monitoring, reporting, and verifying how the fund is being dispersed, how the fund is being, different amounts are being donated into the fund. Having this in a way that is very transparent is critical.
They are already existing tools the governments have to promote public-private finance, and they have a very capillarity. And they also operate normally in a way that basically uses the entire financial markets, follow the fiduciary rules, all the kind of, let's say, standard rules that banks have to operate. They not only follow government rules, but they, as financial institutions are often, they're also part of things like the Basel Convention. And so I think they have basically the kind of, from particularly the fiduciary and let's say fairness point of view, very strong capacity to be able to manage the funds from the point of view of distributing them fairly.
I think one thing which we have been promoting for a number of years now is the issue of subsidiarity. The whole thing that national funding entities in the international context are now being talked about. I mean, they, as I said, they have sprung up independently domestically because they make sense domestically, regardless of the international funding. But in the international funding context, they have sprung up precisely because of issues of ownership, of accountability, all these mainstreaming, all these issues. Now, so we have a subsidiarity principle which comes into place. But this subsidiarity, in a sense, doesn't end at the national borders. I think it's very important that national funding entities will incorporate the same principles, that they also devolve funding decisions to lower levels, to state levels, even to local levels. Now that the balance will have to be, how do you make sure that there is this local level decision making which still conforms to some form of strategy? That will be difficult. But by and large, I think the issue of devolution of decision making it goes on within country as it should be internationally. Well, at the moment, there are some background papers being produced by by consultants and by the interim secretariat about the business model framework. And one of those background papers is on access modalities. And I believe, from what I hear, is that these new and enhanced ways of direct access through national funds will definitely be considered as an option. Okay, so because the point is, it makes sense from a vast variety of reasons, not just country ownership, which I said, effectiveness in terms of mainstreaming. I mean, if you want a policy-making body like a government to include consideration of climate change, it is actually better to let them take the decisions of what they want to fund within the framework given by the Green Climate Fund, but which actual projects should be funded and which not should be done domestically. And it also makes sense in the context internationally in the context of scalability, as it's called. I mean, the Green Climate Fund, no one knows exactly how much money it is meant to process, but it's meant to be significant. I mean, and assuming, for example, that it's going to be in the region of 10 to 20 billion annually in the long term, that's a lot of money to be processed. I mean, there were estimates have been done about how many people does it take to just administer these sort of amounts of money, and it's in the thousands. It's sort of, I mean, for this scale, it's between sort of 6,000 and 8,000 people. And then the question is, where do you want these people to be? I mean, there are different options. You could have all of this centralized in Korea, in Songdo, at the headquarters, or you could actually have these people work at the national level in the recipient countries, which to me, this decentralized evolved model is much more palatable than having a huge concentrated centralized administration for the Green Climate Fund.